Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're tackling a genuinely massive question. How do we actually end poverty in Africa? We're going to dismantle some really stubborn old myths today and dig into the structural truths you need to eradicate poverty across an entire continent. We're talking about a fundamental shift here, moving totally away from temporary fixes and getting it to permanent structural transformations. Let's get right into it.
So how do you end poverty on a continent of 1.4 billion people? When you're looking at a population that huge, those traditional models of economic assistance, they simply don't scale. It's not about just applying a bandage anymore. It's about literally rewiring the entire economic engine.
And Samaila Zabaru, the president and CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation, completely flips the script on this. He says, Africa is not capital poor, it is capital trapped. I absolutely love that quote because it hits the nail right on the head. The continent isn't just sitting around waiting for charity. It is waiting for the right structures to unlock its own immense wealth. The money is actually there. It's just trapped behind these massive systemic barriers. So we really have to move past this outdated handout narrative. The myth is that Africa needs more foreign aid, but the reality? Africa needs structurally bankable projects. We've got to focus entirely on building robust, investable projects where capital, policy, and execution all align. That is how you create long-term prosperity rather than just short-term relief.
Section 1. The infrastructure gap. Measuring the challenge.
To really grasp this challenge, just look at this massive number, $130 to $170 billion. Now that is the annual financing needed to overcome Africa's infrastructure gap. And man, that gap widened even further during the pandemic. To put that into perspective for a second, that is roughly the entire GDP of a country like Hungary, needed every single year. Closing this gap is obviously an immense challenge, but hey, it is also a tremendous investment opportunity.
But behind those billions are some pretty stark human realities. In sub-Saharan Africa, 70% of the population is without access to electricity, compared to just 30% with access. Think about that. You simply cannot industrialize, scale businesses, or, end poverty when the majority of a region is quite literally left in the dark.
And the real-world consequences here are totally unavoidable. The human cost is huge. Hospitals cannot be provisioned. Poor educational standards are perpetuated. You see decreased labor mobility. Ultimately, 43% of the population lives below the poverty line. If you don't have power or transport, human potential is literally stranded. It makes equitable development completely impossible.
Section 2. The urbanization trap. Sprawl versus density.
Now, a major driver of this stranded potential is how cities are built. Urbanization in Africa has often become, pretty dysfunctional. We're seeing sprawling African cities that are single-story, highly congested, and require massive transport investments. People are flooding into these cities because they're pushed by rural stagnation, not necessarily pulled by urban dynamism. Compare that to connected hubs like London, for example, which are dense, specialized, and have highly efficient labor markets. Right now, a lot of African cities are trapped without that vital connectivity. There's this great point from the research. A half-constructed road is useless for connectivity. It's so true, right? You wouldn't try to live in a half-built house. A half-constructed road does absolutely nothing to connect people to markets. Infrastructure only actually raises productivity when the entire network is complete.
Section 3. The power of connectivity. The Tazara case study.
So to prove that completing these networks actually does end poverty, let's look at a really cool historical proof of concept, the Tazara Railway in Tanzania. This railway wasn't just a transport corridor for moving goods around. It was a total catalyst for world transformation. It connected isolated farmers to much wider regional markets. And the poverty-ending impacts of this were just undeniable. Because of Tazara, they saw reduced post-harvest crop losses. We witnessed the rise of small and medium enterprises like agro-processing and cold storage. There was increased access to schools and healthcare. Basically, it led to the total transformation of rural economies into semi-urban clusters. When you lower those transaction costs and actually connect people, household incomes naturally rise.
Section 4. Making projects bankable. Unlocking capital.
Okay, so if connectivity is the cure, how on earth do we finance it across 54 different countries? Well, that brings us to blended finance. This is where you mix public concessional seed capital with private funds. Basically, you use public seed money to lower the investment risk in these regions, which makes private investors feel safe enough to jump in. It's a real game changer because it yields positive financial returns while still achieving massive development impact. But remember, bankability isn't just some sticker you slap on at the end.
It's a strict discipline. There are 3 steps to bankability here. Step 1, resolve technical risks early. Step 2, settle legal and commercial frameworks. And Step 3, pursue financing. Do not try to retrofit this during distress. You literally have to get your ducks in a row before you ever ask for the money.
And this is where multilateral development banks come in, mobilizing capacity and capital. Institutions like the World Bank or the African Development Bank are really digging deep into their toolboxes right now. They're working hard to catalyze this private finance and build these complex, bankable structures right from the ground up.
But you know what the absolute secret weapon is here? Integrating local institutional capital. We're talking about pension funds, life insurance funds, and sovereign wealth funds. By issuing local currency bonds to reduce foreign exchange fragility, you brilliantly protect these massive projects from dangerous currency swings. You're essentially borrowing in the exact same currency the project generates, keeping that wealth generation local and, crucially, stable.
Section 5. The Future, a New Paradigm.
So what does this all mean for the future? Well, it means we need to transform resources into productivity, jobs, and long-term prosperity. When capital, policy, and structurally sound projects finally align, we can stop treating poverty like it's this permanent and inevitable condition we just have to manage with aid. Instead, we start building real, integrated economic ecosystems. And this matters to all of us, by the way, because a prosperous, industrialized Africa means a way stronger, more resilient global economy for sure. I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Will the next decade be defined by the capital Africa receives or the capital it unlocks? Seriously, think about that for a second. It completely changes everything about how we view global development going forward. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. And as always, keep asking those big questions.